session. This is going to be a panel style session, a lively discussion with our four panelists here. I'll introduce you everyone and tell you a little bit about what the format of this session is going to be, and then hand it over to our panelists. They all have a lot to say about this topic, and I know you all are probably going to have a lot of questions, so we'll keep it moving. We're talking about whether or not sustainable OA models are possible for small publishers. And our panelists are we're first going to take a poll on whether you all in the audience agree with this statement. And agreeing means that they are not possible, that OA models are not sustainable for small publishers. And if you agree with that or if you disagree with that, each of the panelists will then have 5 minutes to say why they have had some challenges with this statement, and then 5 minutes to talk about what is working in our OA spaces, in our four institutions. And then, because it's not really going to be a debate between the four panelists, because nobody wanted to take the wrong side of this debate, so each of the panelists will just be kind of in conversation with their own challenges. They'll speak on what has not been possible, what has not worked well, what the challenges have been, and then turn around and kind of talk, rebut back to themselves about what is working and what is going to be sustainable. Our panelists are Charla Lair from Lyrasis, Antonia Popp from the University of Toronto Press, Wendy Queen from Project Muse, and Dean Smith from Duke University Press. If anybody asks after the debate, Dean won the debate. And if that comes up in my annual review, we're going to remember that. So first, if you'll go to this URL or point your cameras at this little screen, we're going to take a poll to see how you all feel right now about whether OA models, and this is in general, just any OA models that you've heard of, that you've tried to work with in your libraries, is this working for you? And again, agreeing with the statement means you don't think it works. And I'm going to see if I can pull up the results of that poll once you're all done. Okay. Here we have, let's see, and not sure how to toggle my other screen that I have down here up onto there, but I'm seeing results showing up. That's good. Right now I have 13 responses agreeing with the statement, 34 disagreeing with the statement. So as of right now, before you've heard these people talk, it seems like the majority in here are pretty optimistic about OA models, which is great to hear, and 14 undecided. So we'll find out after everybody talks. And then probably now that you all have clicked on that thing, there's going to be a second question after everybody talks. We're going to do the poll again and see what happens. So now we have 5 minutes, starting with Charla to tell us about what's not working. What's the challenge? Yes, our timer's right down here.
How about, yes, you can hear, okay. So I appreciate the liveliness that has already been exhibited, and we will try to do the same in return. First, I want to define small publisher, at least in how I look at it. That's up for debate here, right? Especially when looking at who's here at the table. So I'm going to actually put on a program that I administer called the Open Access Community Investment Program. Since we have university presses represented here, to talk about those challenges. And that is a program that funds Diamond OA journals. And not everybody here knows what that is. So that is one of the challenges. And I'm going to be on those days, many days, whenever I feel very cynical about the work that I do to help channel this and the challenges. Many small publishers, and so this is representing university presses who might have multiple programs, journals and books, who might have one journal that they're trying to fund to be sustainably funded. Or this represents a library publisher who has subsidy from their university, but that the journal might need more additional money to help pay for more things than that the library publisher can provide. This also represents scholar-led publishers, where this is the only thing that they publish, and they're an independent that they're publishing through, say, something like PubPub or Janeway. And their challenges. They are usually not very well resourced as far as staff, technology, business knowledge in a lot of cases. And I'm saying as we get away from the university presses, where this is their business, they don't necessarily understand even how much money they might need to cover costs, because there's this question around what do they need just enough, or for sustainability, what is sustainable as opposed to just enough. They don't know what that is. They may not have bank accounts where they can bring money in. They don't have necessarily those resources available to them. But I think most importantly, they don't have connection to the library community. I think a lot of the smaller publishers, that because their relationships through subscription agents and aggregators in a lot of ways have removed themselves from the library community to where it's just publishers out there, not amorphous publishers to the libraries. And whenever looking at them in an aggregate, they become a capital P publisher, which often is not trusted. And so oftentimes I feel like that the library community as a whole, and there are certain ones out there who do support smaller publishers and have missions to do so, but it's a very small amount. And honestly, any business model that is out there will fail, usually not because it's a bad business model, but because the libraries don't show up to fund it. And that's what I face on a day-to-day basis, of trying to convince libraries who especially are seeking transformation but are not willing to change. And I think that is the biggest challenge, especially for smaller publishers who don't even have direct relationships with the library community. It's just a big challenge for them in that way. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Antonia, as Evan said. I'm from University of Toronto Press, and I work in journal publishing. We have 4 business units: journal publishing, book publishing, distribution, and retail. We manage the campus bookstores for the University of Toronto. And the reason I mention that is because it puts us into the fortunate position of being able to experiment with different business models, especially when it comes to open access. To talk a little bit about some of the challenges, I think we probably all are well-versed in the challenges. It's always about, will it work? Will it work in this instance? Will it work tomorrow? Will it work 10 years from now? And that requires investment, and it requires time, and it requires, as Shala mentioned, a lot of effort in technology and business analytics and so forth. Thinking about some of the business models that are available for open access, probably the biggest challenge that I see is the question of equity. When we think of an article processing charge model or a BBC model in book publishing, the question of how do we make those models sustainable and equitable for authors from the Global South, for authors in the social sciences and humanities, and authors at varying stages of their careers. And then we think perhaps, well, maybe a diamond model might be a good solution. And then we get into the question of how do we scale Diamond? How does Diamond apply in different, again, in different circumstances across different disciplines? And so there's always, I think, a challenge of looking at the individual publishing program, the individual journal perhaps, or list of books, and considering what works best in this situation. So that might be also taking me a little bit too far into the road of positive, but just to say it's also an opportunity. It's definitely a challenge though, so thinking about the proliferation of open access models, again, that question of investment, how much availability there is in investing in the analysis, the research that is necessary, and being flexible to experiment. And it does require all members of the scholarly community, as Charlotte was saying, to come together. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I think a couple of caveats first. I'm going to come at this from the point of an aggregator. So like Charla, I can't define what a small title is, a small publisher is, because from the aggregator's viewpoint, everyone is treated equally. I think the theme that you're hearing across all of us today is about resources, and everybody's come at it in a few different ways. And I'll add a few more that those resources include even the beginning to do the analysis of whether this program is, or a program is appropriate for a title, the modeling, the communications, the systems changes, the understanding of a global market, right? And that we may have a very good understanding about sort of the cultural viewpoints from North America, maybe a little bit more in Europe, but then it sort of falls apart for most of us. And I also think right now there's a lot of fear, and so part of why one would believe this is not sustainable is about, and part of our jobs is to manage those risks and fears. And I think back on when journals were first going to a digital platform, and there weren't the fears around those models because the digital was considered to be, let's just call it butter, right? The revenue was coming from the print. And so now we're just flipping everything sort of at one time. So it's a lot of fears and a lot of time sort of needed by everyone to understand, because as there's so many, and it's wonderful that there's so many, this might be positive too, experiments going on, it also takes a lot of time to understand exactly what is entailed in all of these experiments. And like Antonia said, then secondly say, what does that look like in 10 years from now? And it's scary, it's big, and it's a lot to go through.
Thank you, Evan. And what Charla said, what Antonia said, what Wendy said, it's an honor to be on this panel. As a director of University Press, I think openness is, at this very moment, a core value that we need to embrace. We at Duke published 150 books, 110 of which may break even. Most likely they won't, but they're not going to reach their audience unless they have a chance to be open. So at Duke, I would say we're kind of a medium to large size publisher. I was also able to work at Cornell. And when I first got to Duke, my predecessor had signed 17, very quickly, 17 books in the Tome program. And I happened to see the funder out there. But so when I got there, I picked up this file and looked at all of these books. And this activity had happened with the administrative person and the director, and no one else in the whole place really knew what was going on. And the books were being tracked in a FileMaker system that only one person used. It had been outdated, and we kept trying to get on Allison, who's over here's dance card, to be able to help us fix that, but no one wanted to do that. And the funder came and visited, and one of the books hadn't even been made open yet. So this will give you an idea of kind of the information, the communication around open that needs to happen internally. And then for the next 9 months, we embarked on a project to actually integrate openness into our title management system. And it did take us 9 months of meetings, 2 meetings every month, to be able to keep track of these things, because it's it was a great thing for us to participate in this program. There are universities out there that want to help us make our books open, which is great. But internally, our workflows are really still designed towards the print publication, mostly. That's what, someone was asking me, talk about the scale problems that you have when I was in Frankfurt. I'm like, no, we're just all basically editing and looking down. I mean, we're doing that work. We're focused on the content. We're focused on the covers. We're focused on things that are, the digital side is happening for us, but we're mostly engaged in those activities. And the open access pathways can be complicated. So you have Born Open, you have the retro digitization that we did at Cornell, going backwards, bringing books that were out of print or, contacting authors, doing metadata. That was a big challenge in getting the metadata, getting the wording right in that paperback print version that we brought back, because we needed to incentivize the authors to want to participate in open. And some of those authors hadn't, this was a totally new thing. So there's an education process, which I think is happening, but it takes like multiple people across multiple departments to get this done. The NEH program that opens after 3 years, well, one of those have come up, and it's like, all right, well, are you gonna open that book up? Like, it's just like, somebody's got to make sure that these checks and balances are in place. The programs are they're evolving. Knowledge Unlatched, Tome, you have Homegrown OA, you're going to hear about Third Way here. There's multiple programs, so having somebody keep track of those programs, what's happening, where is that all leading? It requires project management of its own kind. That's a resource that you need to be aware of. And there's still, I think, pockets out there. I applaud all the university press directors who are embracing open now, but it's not everyone. And I think people are still fearing that open access is going to erode the print sales. So, there's still challenges out there, but I think openness is something we all need to be fully engaged in at the moment.
Good. Thank you, Dean and everybody. If we'll pass the mic back to the top, now we'll get to hear responses from the same people, but from the other side of the story, and what's working with your OA models.
So on those other days, whenever I get to talk to an editorial board or a publisher about what they're trying to do and how excited they are that they are flipping to open, a program that I have right now that's flipping from print to open access and working through a library publisher, that's when I get excited about this, and where I see there's a lot of hope. And in most cases, small publishers don't require as much revenue. And in this case, we're talking, who I work with mostly are nonprofit. So they actually have a definition of enough. They have enough, to cover their costs and maybe have extra for contingency or innovation. And when you approach libraries with this idea and that they need this much money, libraries actually are stepping up. I said before that they're not, and that's because we have 3,000 some odd institutions just in the US alone, and I work largely for the program that I have, 56. And so how do we get more of those, not just for the program I work with, but also the book programs that I support, whether they're OA native programs who have the advantage of not having to transition. They already understand what their costs are, that they just need to be able to be operational in their costs, or for those who have individual programs like a single journal that they're trying to transition and experiment with. I said a while ago, I was talking about Diamond OA journals, and I actually saw a lot of people nodding their heads. I don't even know if a year ago everybody here other than the publishers might know what Diamond is. And that's very exciting to me, because at the end of the day, where I see that the smaller publishers are really having an advantage is they have flexibility. They have an energy. They have less of this entanglement of trying to, transition to an OA model and maintaining their revenue, so long as they can connect to those funders that are out there, and that community is growing. I see them actually leading the way in innovation and model building, and especially because they are trying to interact directly with the library community and helping shape it with the authors in mind. because they have really tight relationships with the authors that they serve. So I have a lot of hope out there that those of us that are seeking transformation and are afraid to change, I'm starting to see that shift. And it's because of projects like COPM, because of us doing the Open Access Community Investment Program, which has inspired a similar program at JISC, who is doing the Open Access Community Framework that at TIB, and Germany is doing Koala, and then on the entire EU is being funded through the Horizon Europe project to create a program called DIAMAS, which is to create an entire infrastructure to support institutionally supported publishing, so library publishers, university presses of diamond journals, and trying to give sustainable funding across the entire EU with the ideas of maybe that can be replicated in other regions in the world. I see a lot of hope in that it's starting with the smaller publishers and the energy and the bibliodiversity that they provide.
It's really difficult to follow, Charla. Speaking about flexibility and energy, I do want to go back to something that Dean was saying, which is, this point, what's the value of scholarly publishing? In this world of misinformation, where misinformation seems to be traveling at ever-increasing speeds, what's the value of peer-reviewed content? What's the value within academia for sure, and outside of academia? And that's what open access can achieve, bringing that peer-reviewed research, the scholarly content, well beyond academia. So that's why we should all do it, and that's why we should all be thinking about not the question of whether or not it works, more so the question of how. How do we get there? And I could share at UTP, we've been experimenting with several models. We do publish a couple of journals with APCs. We try to have very, generous, flexible waiver policies in place to minimize the risks of inequity. But the risks are there. And so we've also been experimenting with the diamond model. So we publish a couple of journals on the diamond model. Most recently, we just launched the journal on the subscribe to open model. And I have to say, I'm incredibly excited about this model. It carries, the potential of going well beyond different subject fields, different areas of expertise, and it spreads the cost across. It does have the potential of achieving open in a long-term, sustainable way, minimizing inequities as best as we can. So on the book side, we've been working with Knowledge Unlatched, similar to Duke. We've also participated in Tome, and we have a lovely, lovely partnership with the University of Toronto Libraries, whereby the U of T Library acts as a sponsor for a number of books each year. So that brings me to my next point, which is one of the most satisfying, I would say, aspects of this open access journey is this feeling that we're all in it together. We're all working towards similar goals. So we partner with people like Charla at Lyrasis on some of the projects that we work with. We partner with Project Muse, which has been a long-term partner for University of Toronto Press and a very reliable partner. So, and we are a member of the Subscribe to Open community of practice, bringing together funders, libraries, publishers, the various members of the scholarly ecosystem who can all drive change together. So I'll leave it at that, but just to say once again, it's an exciting world. It's a challenging world, but none of us would be employed in this world if it wasn't exciting. We're in it because it's exciting, because we can contribute something to the broader community.
Thank you. I think we have the most enthusiastic and polite panel because it's all very positive here. So again, from the perspective of an aggregation, and I'll speak specifically to our journals program right now, and we've known for a few years we wanted to develop an OA program that would support as many of our participating publishers as possible, that we could design a model that was more inclusive. And that we could scale that model so that all of the resources we mentioned earlier could be applied to hundreds of titles versus just one title at a time. And so for Muse, we selected, with the consultant Raim Crow, the subscribe to open model. And we found that model to be the most equitable model, the most reasonable model, and to sort of negate some of the fears and risks that other models may present to our partner publishers. And we've been very lucky because in that time, as Charlotte mentioned, the Subscribe to Open community of practice has gotten much more attention. It's grown bigger. I think in the time that I've been in it, it's expanded fourfold, I think. And what that does is it provides the opportunity for many of us from many different organizations to be sharing sort of the same message and to make the model, a model, easy to understand and avoid some sort of model exhaustion, if I may, when there's a new model coming out every day. That's not to say I don't support the experimentation. I absolutely do. But we also, I'm always struggling between the notion of we need to go slow and steady so that everyone is coming to this together, with also we need a little bit of sense of urgency too, like we need to move this needle before it's moved in a different direction that we don't find, particularly for university presses and the humanities and social sciences, to remain relevant and to take that openness very seriously. And I felt that from an aggregator's point of view, and from, we are part of Hopkins Press, I sort of said that in the beginning. I have a lot of support to take the necessary risks to minimize the risk to our publishers to make this model work. And so we plan to launch in 2025. And I got the question earlier today, like, what if it doesn't work? And well, I think it's gonna work, or I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be back at home with Raim coming up with another model, but that's exactly it. Like, we will keep going until we find what works for many of our participating publishers.
Thanks. Those are great. And it's made me change a little bit what I'm going to do. So I'm going to talk about, and we do some OA journals at Duke, and we find ourselves sometimes as a small publisher too. And in lockdown, we received an RFP for a journal that was with a commercial publisher. And during lockdown, we were looking at the coronavirus map. We were looking at that every day. You know, everybody was doing that. And when we talked about the journal, we have a group meets every Tuesday. Allison's part of that too. And we were like, no, we can't bid on this journal because we can't cover that amount of money that the commercial publisher can give with the licensing. So we said, okay, we'll talk about it again. And over the course of that week, we decided that it was too important to pass up the opportunity to publish a journal about population statistics at that time. That, inspired by the coronavirus map, we decided we're just going to jump in, make this journal OA. We don't have a model for it, a funding model. So we went for a kind of community. We were watching what PLOS was doing, but that was just everybody just jumping in saying, this is what we should be as a university press. This is what we should do, because this is going to move, this data is the data of disparity and is going to move society forward. Now, we're about 2.5 years into that. And you know what? We have people doing everything else related to all the other models we're supporting, so it's very hard for us to kind of get everybody to jump on and say, hey, can you call this library that's got 11 submissions that really should be not a free rider, but is. And we are also now looking very heavily at S2O, and probably the main person behind anything we want to call success, I mean, publishing that journal is success, taking that editorial group that had been treated a certain way and doing the right thing with that editorial group, because that's what we do as a boutique publisher. We have a lot of expertise from Oxford University Press that's at Duke. We have tremendously talented staff, and that whole side of it, the publishing side, is going very well. Now, we're still losing money, but without Charla jumped in and the folks at Lyrasis, and they really have helped us. And we're at a place where, okay, this model is not getting us to break even, but it's not that far away. And we're working with RAIM and others to look at S2O. So it may be, OA for the small publisher may be an existential necessity, is basically what I'm trying to say. And, go to your library, talk to Project Muse. I mean, the discoverability on those platforms, you can't find it anywhere. And that's what this is all about. This is getting that content to somewhere, to somebody whose life is going to change because they've been able to access it.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for telling both sides of your stories, your challenges, but also the successes that we've had. I'm going to ask everybody to come back to the poll, click through to our second question, which is the same question as the first, but now after you've heard everybody talk, has your opinion changed? Are you more optimistic? Hopefully, you're not less optimistic after hearing what the successes that we are having. When I asked this question the first time, it was about maybe a small majority said that these OA models were sustainable, and about half of you were either said they were not sustainable or were undecided. So let's see. And I am not seeing any results come in for the second question, so I wonder if something's wrong with my... It's not letting you do that? Okay. Let's just raise hands. Yeah. Can we do it that way? All right. Who thinks that these OA models that we've talked about today are not sustainable for small publishers? This is not going to work. Any hands up for that? Couple hands. Yeah. It's a valid concern. You did hear the challenges. Who all thinks that these models are going to be sustainable, that we're going to find the right way to do this and get it to work? Okay.
I was very concerned. Yeah.
I'm concerned. Sustainable for small publishers, yes. The question, I will ask it the way it is on the title of the thing. Sustainable OA models are not possible for small publishers. Who thinks that? We have consortia that represent small publishers, and we do have 2 small publishers on the panel. I can't speak to the formation of this panel.
I think I can repeat it. I heard it from here. It was why we did not include a small publisher on the panel. And I think it's a very good question, and maybe we should have expanded it. We tried to get as many viewpoints, and I think as Charla represents many small publishers, I represent many small publishers, but the panel could have been more robust with an actual small publisher. But on the other hand, Dean just defined himself as a small publisher. So we're back to the beginning of this conversation of what is the definition? So
I wouldn't call them a small publisher. In all fairness, wouldn't you, what's your output per year?
150 titles, 3,000 backlists and 60 journals.
Okay.
I think you have a very good point, and
not
we,
small.
we could have defined that a little bit better at the very beginning. Yeah. Thank you for that.
We got a few more questions in the back, if we can take the mic back there.
Are we counting, or we might, are they
Are these
questions?
are these questions or are these votes?
Questions?
Questions. Okay. By the lack of hands raised on the first question, I think I know where the other hands were going to go up.
So, so as a small publisher, right, I can say that are sustainable OA models possible for small publishers? Currently, I'm undecided, right? And I'll tell you why. Like when you look at the math behind it and the questions we get asked, it makes a really hard case. So when we hit our first transformative agreement, we were like over the moon. We're like, we're going to do more of these. We're going to get more and more. And as we went out into the world and started talking to other consortia, other larger institutions, you get hit with these questions. Well, how much did you publish with us? How much did you do this with us? And then you're like, well, we didn't. And then like, well, and so you kind of hit this wall. I'm like, well, sorry, we're busy with the big guys, right? We're not ready for you yet. And so this has kind of been our narrative for the last year since we signed the last transformative agreement. So for me, I'm still undecided because I need to see that the community is ready to support small publishers with sustainable OA models. And then I'll feel better about answering that question. So right now, I'm undecided.
Hello. Yes, it's working. So basically, one thing we're seeing in the UK is a lot of libraries are setting up their own kind of diamond open access hosting services. Just for full transparency, I manage the University of Edinburgh's one. Is this something that you're seeing in the UK, in the USA, and what are your thoughts about it? Anyone?
Sorry, I was. Can you ask that one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I made it very long-winded. So basically, the UK, there are a lot of libraries that are setting up diamond open access hosting services. Is this something that's happening across the States? And what do you think about it?
I think a good equivalent to this is the Library Publishing Coalition. This represents library publishing instances, like what you would see in the UK, and a lot of instances what the new university presses might represent, where they have institutional funding that's funneled through the library budget to support publishing instances. There are varying sizes. Some of them are just doing white papers or, helping with theses, dissertations even, but some of them are actually supporting journals. Either they're affiliated with their faculty or they actually were sought out externally in that way. But there are also a few that are doing a bit of book publishing, although that is a challenge, especially in a library instance, because they don't necessarily have all the publishing expertise that's needed to do all of that, or the resources, because it's very expensive to do. So yes, it's a growing community, but it's scary in the sense of sustainability because of the fluctuation of library budgets. And as far as how it might be valued will determine whether it's one of the first to be cut or not. But yes, that is a thing here in the U.S.
Sounds like very similar challenges to what we're having in the UK with sustainability and growth. So that's interesting. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Roller skates.
So my name is Peter Potter. I'm at Virginia Tech, and in addition to Tome, I do run a very small publishing program, a library publishing program, which is, I think, a perspective that could have been represented here. So it really depends. Are we sustainable? We publish about five books a year, 5 to 10 open educational resources, 10 to 13 journals on an ongoing basis, digital projects, and we're starting a podcasting program. it's sustainable. We have no income. Everything is open access. It's sustainable because I have a dean of the libraries who supports what we do. But my budget is less than the amount that when I was in university press publishing that the university subvented the budget of the press for. So sustainable, if sustainable is breaking even, traditional university press publishing for the most part is not sustainable. And I think, so I think of it, our press is a very small publishing program, but we've established a kind of a culture there where we can produce the right amount that we need to on a yearly basis and have the support of our community and our director. If that changed, we would then not be sustainable. So.
While we wait for the next question, I do want to bring up words. Words are really powerful. And so when we're bringing up words like sustainability, what does that mean? And I'm hearing that in a lot of cases, do you pay for the labor or do you keep the volunteer labor? And is that sustainable? There's also the matter of OA models. We heard read and publish, which a lot of smaller publishers actually don't do. Some do, but the administration is really difficult. But there are other models. I would have to argue that there aren't that many, you hear about a lot of them, but they're actually program names that are based on just a very few kinds of models. So I don't know if we have a shared understanding of even what OA models are in this room. Because you have institutional subsidies, you have transformative agreements, you have subscribe to open and various collective and membership models that are represented across all of this small publishers. So I think, what we're raising here, yes, we have wonderful stories here, those that were not necessarily amplified, like the library publishing stories, as well as the OA native publishers who've been leading the way in a lot of this. In particular, like Open Book Publishers, Punctum Books, others who are making our imaginations much bigger and thinking in new ways of how to run our businesses. Because at the end of the day, these are businesses. Even in a library, it is a business. It's about money and how do we do this in a sustainable way. And so, but we have to have this idea of either we're going to agree that we're going to disagree on what sustainable means and what OA models mean, or are we going to try to have some shared language as we talk about it, which I would hope we do that, and understanding that everybody that we want as part of this community to support it and sustain it, including the authors, which are also not represented here very well, but the libraries and the varying types of libraries. I mean, that's, I think, our biggest barrier and our biggest challenge that probably will kill open access movement if we don't come to some kind of agreement around that. So the next question.
Hey, I'm Patrick Alexander. I'm the director at Penn State University Press. We are a micro press. We do publish a few open access books and journals. And I had a question for the panel regarding, it's my understanding that commercial publishers are really the ones who have a sustainable business model for open access. Those 5 publishers that publish 55% of all scholarly research are also exploiting the open access movement. And I wonder what can we do to get in the line for that trough of funding that is behind those large publishers taking advantage, because the model works for them, right? So the model is not the question. I think the conflict for us is what Dean mentioned, is existential necessity. We want to talk about business models, but we all at heart are working out of existential necessity to do our jobs and our mission. It's very difficult to do that and be successful financially.
Someone else.
There was a question in there, I think. I'm not sure.
It was a good question, Patrick. I could start and then pass it on. And I think it brings us back to that question of size again. It's so relative, right? I think we probably, when we look at the commercial publishers that you alluded to, we're all small publishers, right? UTP doesn't have 2,000 journals. I wish we did, but we don't. And so how do we accomplish the benefit that the larger publishers have is scale. There's a lot of money for R&D and perhaps a lot of personnel for R&D, and at the same time, the question of scale. To be able to leverage some of these models. So I think from our perspective, we've been thinking about it, well, how do we allow ourselves to be bigger? And that's when the partnerships questions come in. And that's something that we've been doing for a number of years. For as long as we've been online and digital publishing, we've been seeking partners. And partners such as Charla, I think I heard Charla is a saint in this world, and I completely agree she is. So I really think that bringing the community together is probably the best way forward in order for the smaller publishers to achieve some of that scale.
So it's not necessarily answering your question, but maybe with a question, Patrick. How do we know that the for-profit publishers are actually making this model work? Or are they just getting out ahead of the nonprofit publishers, and that's sort of speaks to that urgency that I was mentioning earlier. So. Right.
Could you, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I've got the mic. So could you synthesize what he just said? Thanks.
How do we get the money is basically.
Okay, that's good.
Right, I mean, that's kind of, so it's interesting in Frankfurt, talking to some of the bigger commercial publishers, what they were saying is market share, market share, market share. And it's all about the article now. And there will be, and humanities publishing, forgive me, but it's kind of a mess when it comes to journals. And the funding is not the same. So the opportunities for us are going to be those journals that come to us to say, hey, look, we're going to have to transition. We don't want to do that. Can you guys play a role there? But if we're not going to be able to, it's just, I don't think on our side of the system, I mean, the money goes away in many different ways, right? So you read about some big consortia does a big deal with one of the big commercial publishers, and in there, it's a read and publish agreement, and then there's a 2.5% increase every year. So there's $1 million going, for whatever reason, out of a system that might be towards humanities-based publishers. So, and I would say that whole Plan S thing worked very well for commercial publishers, because there was a way to kind of, you know, there was an upcharge that even made it even more appealing. So every time there's a 2.5% increase on one of the big deals, that's 200,000. Let's say it's 10 million, right? That's $250,000 that comes out of a book budget, or that comes out of another budget. So, and that's only going to continue. So we're going to have to figure out ways to deal with that. But I don't think there's a way for us to kind of jump in unless universities come together and say, hey, we can, and there are people talking about this, but you know, to get your head around it, it's pretty, you've got MIT, you've got Hopkins, you've got big journal publishers, Toronto, you've got a way to take it back, but that's probably 10 years in the making.
Got another question back here?
I just want to make one comment. I question whether or not open access models that the commercial publishers are providing are actually sustainable. Because if it were, then they would have completely adopted that model to support all of their publishing. And it's not sustainable. And in a lot of cases, the reason why that they are early adopters in that is because they are also receivers of a lot of funding money, right, from funding agencies. And funding agencies only have channels of giving money to authors. They don't pay publishers, and it's really difficult for it to go to libraries. And so they make it based on the article itself, and that's why the APCs exist. And APCs are not a good way of piecemealing how much your operations, how much money you need to do all of your operations. So they've been doing it little by little by little, planning that out as commercial publishers do, because they have the resources to do that and the scale to be able to do that. But I question whether or not it's sustainable, because otherwise they would be adopting like subscribe to open models. They would be adopting a variety of models, and some aren't. They are doing some diamond support and things like that. They're expanding that, but they're experimenting just as much as everyone else.
Yeah, hi, Adam Hyde from Coco. We build open source publishing systems. Erudite did a very interesting survey where they found out using a happiness principle or metric, and they found that the smaller the publisher was, the happier they were. And I think it reflects, especially in the diamond open access sector, the idea that there is intrinsic motivation and community at the heart. There's a close coupling of the community. Those doing the work and those being published, etc., or those doing the editing. I'm just wondering, there are a lot of initiatives that have been discussed about bringing in resources top down, and whether this could actually destroy, potentially, without willing to, some of the fabric of the intrinsic motivation that actually fuels this work. Whether that's something that needs to be considered, whether by bringing top-down resources you might destroy the reason why people are doing this in the first place.
I think I'm really going to have to think about that question, Adam. I'm like parsing it right now, and I'm seeing a lot of quizzical looks from the audience. So I'm thinking we're all thinking here about what that means. I'm not seeing. Maybe if you defined what bottom up is in this question, that would help one of us sort of form an answer.
I'm just talking about general community principles, right? When you have a community that's drawn together for intrinsic existential reasons or intrinsic motivations, that there is a paradox that you can enter in when you start imposing requirements, or you start wanting to sort of fuel them in a way that's not fully engaged with them. You know, you can imagine a situation you want to build an overlay of copyright services to help some of these folks, right? But actually, it's somebody local that's doing that for love, right? And maybe gets paid a little bit. So there's a tension immediately created. Do I keep supporting this community member, or do I take these, cheaper services from this bigger entity? And so the fabric, you can see a tear in the community right at that moment, right? So I guess that's a question, like, can you actually do no evil by trying to bring resources into that? I'm specifically talking about the Diamond Open Access, because as one Alperin from OJS said at the Diamond OA meeting in Croatia very eloquently, that there basically is no business model for Diamond OA, right? These people are resourcing the money from various places locally. It's all different. There's no standard model. And so there's a lot of stuff that's coming from love and passion, and whether you have to be very, very careful that you don't accidentally damage that in the process.
Absolutely. And I think, honestly, that's the responsibility of the culture of each publisher to maintain, because that's not something that we can do externally. And it scares me to hear everybody calling me a saint or whatever. I'm not the only one doing this in this space, but what if I wasn't here anymore? And what can I do to spread that love and that passion? Because that's not sustainable. I'm burnt out. I mean, I don't know about a lot of you, but my passion for this just keeps driving me. But I worry they're the same individuals that are popping up around the world that are supporting this. And how do we leverage that? How do we leverage the love? Because individual love is not sustainable. The altruism is not sustainable. Because at the end of the day, this comes down to bottom line dollars for libraries. And it comes to sustainability and operation costs and being able to pay for your, letting your staff be able to have jobs and keeping your staff, and that they don't go to the commercial publishers because they can get paid more. And that comes back to, how do we get the money? And it's going to come down to, we have to make the decisions of, how do we rebalance the system? The commercial publishers, if they went away, and I know there are some that wish they would, because it doesn't fit scholarly publishing, but if they went away tomorrow, we would not have an infrastructure to support the authors that are out there now. We need them to be able to continue that. But whenever it's taking up 80–90% of a library's budget to pay 5 publishers, that's also a problem. So how do we rebalance that system so that it's funded, so it's not just love, but it's sustainably funded passion and all of that? So I don't know if that answers your question. But again, it comes down to the individual publishers, but also connecting with those who fund these programs, because you have to have the money to be able to do it. And that's the hard part, and why these programs are slow to start and why they're underfunded, because we keep saying it's a project of passion and love. And if you do that, then nobody will give you the money. And because the commercial publishers are able to get, hey, I'm begging libraries to give me $25,000 a year for a journal for 5 years, whenever I also see an invoice go by for $1 million for another publisher. So there has to be some kind of balance there with what the content that the libraries need, and understanding what content is available out there and the programs that are out there. And it's getting that visibility of the bibliodiversity represented by the small publishers, including those Diamond OA that are doing it by the love but might need a little bit of money. How do we get that to them, right? Because they do have a definition of enough. And how do we pay them first and then maybe give the money to the for-profit entities who are serving the same authors that we are supporting at our libraries, right? There has to be equity in here, and that includes including those commercial publishers, but we need balance.
And we are just about at our time. It is 2:14, so maybe one more question, or just maybe a closing statement from everybody, if there's anything else anybody wants to know.
Oops, I'm sorry.
So I wonder, is it perhaps an issue, for libraries to decide because they don't see the whole picture? How many small publishers are out there looking for money? So in Europe, we have this coalition called Knowledge Exchange. They're also running a study at the moment looking into the definition of a small publisher. So they have the number of journals as a criterion, and also assessing the size, in the sense of how many journals are there, or how many of these publishers are out there. Only, of course, looking at a small chunk, because they only look at the number of countries. So it's also a community exercise maybe which should be done. So in the sense of some data work. And then librarians might be feeling safer in the sense of what's out there, and organizing, this. Maybe only 10% are small publishers, but this is still substantial share of the market.
There's always a balance that needs to happen, right, between finding the right audiences and finding all of the audiences that can be found. And it is very much a challenge. It takes us back into that question of resources. Smaller publishers have fewer resources to go out into the world and promote themselves, promote all of the lists. And it raises exactly that challenge. So I jotted down Knowledge Exchange, I think you said, because that kind of database could really be beneficial. And I think we could all probably name the 5 largest publishers in the world without having to open up Google. But can we do the same for all of the other publishers in the world? So it's a very good point.
Thank you, everyone. I think that's our time. So thank you, Charlotte, Antonia, Wendy, and Dean. And thank you, everybody, for coming.